In progress.
Hello everyone, my name is Kemi Kayode, and today we will be talking on when discipline becomes harm. We'll be focusing on a victim-centered analysis of corporal punishment, legal and psychological impact on immigrants' children in Canada. Sorry. Here's what we'll cover today. We would cover the key definitions, Canadian legal framework, cultural conflict, psychological impacts, vulnerabilities of immigrant children, cultural and Fallon's framework, systematic factors, um, solutions and key takeaways. And we'll also talk about our discussion. We'll briefly talk about our discussion question. Now, for a brief introduction about myself, as I earlier mentioned, my name is Kemi Comfort Kayode. I'm a fourth year psychology major student aspiring to one day be a food therapist because I love to cook. Um, I currently stay in Regina, but I am originally from Nigeria. As we go on in this lecture, I would like us to use our imagination. So let's imagine a family of probably four, father, mother, and two kids immigrating from anywhere in the world that is not Canada. So Nigeria, um, South Africa, anywhere you want to think of. Now, I would give my own perspective because I'm from Nigeria. In Nigeria, disciplining a child using corporal punishment is allowed. It's okay. It's a way of instilling discipline with love, and it's the norm and it is allowed. It's okay. But coming down to Canada, I realized that that is not a norm. That is not okay. That is not allowed. And it can even be physical abuse. And then this now draws a thin line to where is corporal punishment physical abuse? When does it become physical abuse? And when is it discipline? And this conflict has affected not only Canadians, but also immigrants who have come to Canada. And that's what we're going to be talking about, the psychological and the legal impact it has had on immigrants in Canada. Um, so this is our learning objectives. We'll define key terminology as earlier said. We'll examine the Canadian legal framework. We'll explore corporal punishment when it's used by immigrant families in Canada. We'll talk about we'll explore this using Fallon's framework study, which is the empirical study. We'll also use Bowlby's attachment theory, social learning theory, trauma and stress theory. We'll discuss how cultural norms and practices of different ethnicities can shape discipline practices, vulnerability, and reporting behaviors. So we'll first of all talk about the key terminologies. So we have corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is physical force used to discipline, causing pain or discomfort. Child abuse is physical or sexual harm to a child. Immigrant is someone who moves from another country to settle in another one. A victim is a person who has um a person harmed by a crime. Sorry, I wasn't clicking my notes. Um, a child is a young woman below puberty. Law is systems of rules that of a particular country that guides the citizens of that country and can instill punishments or can instill punishments to the citizens of that country. Cycle of violence is when the victims of an abuse becomes a a, a victimizer later in future. So now let's talk about the Canadian legal framework. Section 43 of the Criminal Code allows parents to and teachers to use reasonable force for discipline. But now the question is what counts as reasonable force? So sorry. Reasonable force. This is where interpretation and complexes comes in, especially for immigrant families who are unfamiliar with Canadian norms. So for something to be a reasonable force, it must prevent immediate threats. It must be for corrective purposes and not with the intent to cause harm to the child. The child must the what's the name? The force use must be reasonably objective to the circumstance and appropriate for the child's age. And we can never ever involve using objects to hit a child, no matter the circumstance. Objects are not permitted to hit a child, and we can't even hit a child that is 2 years or below. So Fallon's research shows that child protection laws are shaped by dominant cultural norms. Immigrant families often feel misunderstood or judged, and it is not just about what the parents it's not just about what the parents do, it's also about how the system interprets what the parents has done. And this leads to a systemic bias and unequal treatment. So, what are some cultural conflicts? Many immigrant parents see physical discipline to be a way of love and respect to their children, but in Canada, it can be seen as abuse. Children may feel torn to being loyal to their parents and also afraid of authorities. And this fear can lead to silence and underreporting, especially when corporal punishment now becomes physical abuse. Fallon's study also shows that immigrant children can be underrepresented in child welfare investigation. So, according to Fallon, ethnic minority, which are indigenous people, and immigrant children in Canada were underrepresented when child welfare investigation was carried out, suggesting that there was underreporting, and this might be due to cultural and language barrier. Some social constructs that would look into. So Clement in his study found that immigrant parents believe strongly influences punishment and disciplinary practices, but they also lack understanding of the psychological risk, which is in the Canadian context. Fallon also describes that many immigrants face dual reality, where immigrant families navigate conflicting worlds, home culture, and Canadian law. So we'll be talking about the physical theories, which is attachment theory, social learning theory, and trauma theory. We'll be seeing how these theories can further explain or help us understand why corporal punishment isn't the best way to go when severe corporal punishment is not the best way to go when trying to train a child. So Bubbly's attachment theory. It's a Bubble attachment theory says children need secure bonds. Harsh disciplines would break trust, create fear, which would lead to insecure attachment. Afif in his study found out that adults who experienced corporal punishment as children were more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and also substance abuse. This shows how early discipline can have a long-term mental health effect on children in the future. Bundra's social learning theory, on the other hand, said that children learn by watching and observing. So if they see violence being used to solve a problem, then they may imitate it later in future or even presently. And then Groff's meta-analysis shows links between corporal punishment and aggression. It also shows link between corporal punishment and poor moral development and weak parental-child relationships. So corporal punishment can lead to poor development in a child and weak parent-child relationship. And this can perpetuate the cycle of violence across generations. So a child who experiences corporal punishment may likely use it later in life when dealing with their own children. Even without physical injury, corporal punishment can still cause trauma and hypervigilance, anxiety, and emotional instability. And that is what trauma theory explains. It explains that the overwhelming events can create helplessness, and frequent punishment increases stress response and damages emotional regulation. Now, What are the psychological impacts in summary? Corporal punishment psychological impacts on children, not just immigrant children. It increases aggression, anxiety, and trust issues, poor academic performance, and mental health issues. It changes the brain development, similar to those seen in children that are exposed to abuse. Now, why are immigrant children more vulnerable to this? Immigrant children are more vulnerable because there's the conflicting cultural backgrounds where they have to pick between the home values and also Canadian norms. There's also confusion of who to be loyal to. Should we be loyal to our parents? And if we're loyal to our parents, does that also affect the Canadian norms and Canadian laws? Language and stigma barriers can also make children more vulnerable to corporal punishment, because most of them, they're still growing, so they lack the exact words to express how they actually feel. And some children, it's just guilt. Some children feel responsible for their parents' predicament, and they just it makes it difficult for them to disclose. Now, trauma isn't just caused by parents, it's also shaped by how systems respond. Investigations and stigma can reinforce insecurity. And that's when the cultural and systematic barriers come in. So we have to look at both cultural and systematic barriers that would influence how corporal punishment is being seen. So we need to look at cultural beliefs about discipline from both parents and Canadian immigrant parents and the Canadian laws. We need to understand language and communication barriers of immigrants. We need to understand the fear of being separated from caretakers of the child and the systematic biases of cultural insensitivity. Fallon's framework urges us to look through a dual lens of psychological harm at home and structural harm from the institutions or the Canadian institutions. So it's saying that both the psychological harm from home and psychological harm from Canadian institutions can both affect children. So it's not just only corporal punishment from home. What are the actions taken by those corporal punishments? So Canadian government is acting on that on a particular report of a corporal of a parent beating their child. That report, how does it affect the child? And then actually the action done by the parents, is it actually physical abuse, or was the parents actually trying to discipline the child? So what are some recommendations? To address this issue, we need clear legal definitions of what reasonable force is. Education for immigrant parents is much needed. Trauma-informed, culturally responsive child welfare workers and teachers are also needed. Multilingual counseling and school-based awareness programs are needed, and collaboration between communities and child protection agencies is also needed. So what are the key takeaways? Corporal punishment in immigrant families must be understood through law, psychology, and culture. Section 43 creates confusion, and then in attempts to, to correct abuse, we sometimes inflict trauma. Fallon's framework reviews systematic issues that need to be looked into in order to have a balance in the laws, in the legal framework of under corporal punishment, and also in the psychological framework of corporal punishment. We need trauma-informed, culturally responsive solutions to truly protect children. So we need to have a victim-centered approach that would help to protect both children, parents, and also enable the Canadian law to help immigrants families to bloom in Canada, and also to avoid being arrested or apprehended for trying to discipline their children. These are my references, and finally we would go to our discussion questions. So in this discussion question, I've spoken a lot about trying to integrate immigrant cultural views on corporal punishment with Canadian views on corporal punishment. Do we think this is possible? If we think this is possible, then what methods can we use, or can we suggest to use to help? And then what are the potential benefits and challenges of integrating immigrant views on discipline into Canadian corporal punishment laws. I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture as much as I enjoyed doing a research. This lecture holds a huge, it holds a deep place in my heart because I'm also an immigrant who has gone through corporal punishment and I have my own experience. And I would have loved to share my experience, but time would not permit me. Thank you very much for watching this lecture and bye.